Welcome to the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast, where we remember a time when stacks of cards were held together with rubber bands and Mickey mantles were put in bike spokes. We hope you will enjoy and reminisce as you come along with us as we tell stories about the baseball cards from the Golden Age of Baseball. We will examine the state of the vintage baseball card market and talk to some of the greatest collectors in the hobby. You won't be hearing us talk about any chrome or shiny cards here. Now, to take you on this retrospective journey, here's your host, direct from the shallow end of the gene pool, my son, Mike Moynihan.
Yo and hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast. I am your host, Mike Moynihan, and this is just going to be a fun week because we got a lot going on in the vintage world. PSA has started to, dangle out there that they're going to restart regular submissions, although it doesn't feel like that's at the price point of what they're talking about, $100. That doesn't really move the needle, I think, for a lot of vintage collectors. Maybe some of you have decided you're going to start sending in again. I don't know. We've got the Hall of Fame induction was done on Sunday night, December 5th. So depending on when you're listening to this or watching this, it certainly already happened. We're recording this after that. So there were 6 new Hall of Famers announced, 4 of which are right in the wheelhouse of the vintage card era, which is great in a lot of respects. I love seeing, I'm a big Hall guy. I believe we should recognize and honor all these players that have done so much for the game. I'm also discouraged because now I have all these cards I have to go buy eventually over time. And I've been doing this so long, 40 years, that it's what I'm going to do tonight is refreshing. I'm going to bring a guest on tonight that let's see, he wasn't born. Well, we'll talk about that. He's a youngin', but highly respected guy in the community. I love his stuff. I absolutely love seeing what he does. I love how he thinks about the hobby, and that's a key thing. And we both contribute to Hobby Hotline. So let me just bring him on right now. Ryan, what's up, man?
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me on.
So Ryan Nolan, Breakout Cards is your YouTube channel. How long have you been doing YouTube and stuff?
So I started YouTube probably end of last summer. I think like towards August, September-ish. So slightly over a year and a half, probably.
Okay. But how old are you? I mean, I just got to get that out on the table right now. How old are you?
How old do you think I am?
I think you're 23.
Yep. There you go. I was born in 98.
98. I have underwear older than you, but that's okay. No, I have nothing, but I think you, even given your age, you have so much experience in the hobby, because I know you've been doing it since you were super young with your dad. You were named after Nolan Ryan, which is fantastic. I got Nolan Ryan stuff all over my room here. I'm a huge Nolan Ryan guy.
Poster right there.
That's right. Poster right there. So totally dig it. And I briefly met you in person at the Dallas show at the Dr. Beckett, what do they call it? The content creators dinner kind of thing.
Content dinner. Yep.
And I just, since then, just been admiring what you're doing and love what you're doing. The first thing I want to talk about is card shows. You go to more card shows than anybody. I think you've been to more shows this year than I've probably been to in my entire life. How many shows have you been to this year, and what inspired this idea?
Yeah. So right now I have finished 50 shows for the year. I have 2 more left. My goal for this year was 52. And honestly, it just kind of happened naturally. Florida has a ton of local shows. And for some reason, one day I decided I'm going to do 3 card shows in 24 hours or 3 card shows in one day. I made 2 of those separate videos where I just drove all across Florida from Orlando all the way to the East Coast of Florida, back to the West Coast of Florida, back to Orlando, one day to hit 3 shows. Because the local shows are everywhere nowadays. And I did that, did 3 in one day as well. And I just kept kind of pushing it. Some weekends where I did 1 or 2 shows or multiple shows on weekends. And I was on an interview. There's another YouTuber, Neo Cards and Comics, and he was asking me how many shows I did. I had no idea. And I started counting, and I think I was in my 30s already. I was like, holy crap, I've gone to a lot of card shows. So then I made it my idea just to finish off the year with 52 shows, pretty much one every weekend, and kind of enjoy the hobby through that way.
Impressive doesn't even begin to describe that. Dedication, stamina, all these things that a 48-year-old guy like myself would have a really hard time keeping up with. I mean, all the traveling and you're flying everywhere. And I've got to ask you this because I'm very curious. We didn't talk pre-show that there could be some questions you don't want to answer, but
I'm open. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I love it. I'm still going to ask the question. I think that's going to stop me. But I mean, you're a young guy. This can't be cheap. How are you funding all of this?
Yeah, so I have a full-time job as a data analyst. So I work every day from 8 to 5. So I'll do that Monday through Friday, and on the weekends I'll go to the card shows. And then at the shows I do flip some cards as well to help cover costs, but I try to keep my costs as low as possible. I'll find the cheapest flights, those $60, $70 flights on a Spirit or Frontier. They're not comfortable by any means. They're not great, but at the same time, to be able to go to a show one day and then fly back later on for $60, $70, you can't really beat it.
I'm going to get you there, right? I mean,
yeah.
At the end of the day, well, I'm going to throw this invitation out next time you're in Dallas for the Dallas show. If you need a place to stay for free, you can come stay here and come to the card room and check out the beast and talk cards with me. You're more than welcome to come here.
Hey, I really appreciate it. I need to check out the card room. James was telling me a lot about it.
Yeah, it's we've got some. I've had quite a few visitors, including Dr. Beckett recently to the card room. But I just love that you're doing this. That you're going to card shows. The experience that you're gaining, I don't think you'll realize it later. But just seeing how dealers work and the art of the negotiation and all the things that you do that you're picking up and with, either subliminally or overtly, this is all going to really pay off for you as you continue in the hobby going forward. It's very impressive. Let me just put it that way.
Thank you. And it's not only just that. It's like when I go to a dealer and I see a brand I don't recognize, I try to talk to the dealer to learn about that, because there's so many different cards out there that we don't know or we very, very seldomly see. So if I see something, I'll learn about it and then just have that mental note of it and kind of just build out all the different brands, different years, and learn a little bit about the hobby every time going to the show.
When I was younger, probably younger than you even, but not much younger than you, I used to randomly put cards in a stack and then I would put them out and I'd try to guess the year, because I know now I could look at any card right now and certainly in the vintage era or post-war and tell you what year it was. I couldn't do that when I was young. I didn't know all the year. Is it 56 or 55? How did you kind of start learning all that stuff? Just experience, just time?
I'd say a lot of experience, and then from my dad as well. So my dad owned an LCS in the 90s, sold it before I was born, but he always took me to a lot of card shows when I was younger and always dealt with vintage cards. So he kind of always showed me his pickups, and you quickly learn the years and the names of the players through that way.
I think another big thing is I think now in our world of the hobby world that exists today, you have access to, I'm going to use the word mentors in a way that I never did, unless my dad was teaching me, which he didn't know about cards. So he wasn't, not that he wouldn't have, that wasn't his thing. And so I had to learn cards through reading Beckett magazine as a kid, or there was no internet. There was no anything. You just kind of went to the card shop and kind of learned a little bit at a time. You can accelerate your learning curve so much more because of the access to information that you have, not just online, but the people resource is gigantic. I mean, the experience that you have available to you. Who would you say are some of your hobby mentors? Obviously your dad, you've mentioned several times, but anyone else that just screams at you as hobby mentor that's taught you a lot over the last year and a half or so, 2 years?
I mean, there's been so many just between watching YouTube videos and talking to people at shows, different dealers. I mean, even like the whole crew of Hobby Hotlines, I've learned from quite a few different people over there. There's so many people out there you just have those conversations with, and they're going to teach you what they know. And even speaking back earlier, when I was younger, I used to read through those Beckett magazines, all the different pages, learning about the releases, learning about these different sets that people were putting together and everything like that. I really didn't read much online. When I went to YouTube, the content space today compared to where it was 10 years ago is completely different. Back then, you mostly had people opening up boxes on YouTube, but nowadays there's so much information available for everyone.
Yeah. Another guy who's your age, JT, Triple Crown 24. JT, I'm sure, and who he is, but he is similar, and he really leans on. He's created his own knowledge base of what he understands and has clarity on, but he leans into a lot of older collectors, and I think that's very wise. If you can do that, just go, look, I don't know it all. I'm telling you, at 48, I don't know it all, and the more you just want to be a sponge all the time, like you said, going up to dealers, hey, what is that card? How is that released? How and you're going to have to. It may take multiple questions, the same question, to get it to stick. I know I've heard this before. I don't remember. Can you tell me again? And nobody worth their salt will be unwilling to tell you. Like, ask me the same question as many times as you want till it sticks. It takes time, but I think you're just so ahead of the game, and that's really going to benefit you down the road in the hobby for sure. So kudos to you, man.
Thanks, I really appreciate it.
So vintage, you're 23 years old. What do you think about vintage baseball cards?
I mean, I think that's where people should be buying cards right now instead of all the modern stuff. There's just way too much being printed nowadays compared to the print runs in the past. And people speculate way too much on the hobby where you can have safer investments or safer card purchases in the past. Every year, people throw ridiculous amount of monies on top 10 prospects. But if you look through the last 10 years or 15 years of top 10 prospects, very few even make it past 5 or 6 years into baseball. And even seldom amount of those players end up making the Hall of Fame. And if they do make the Hall of Fame, are they upper tier players or are they lower tier players? At the same time, you can still find Maze cards, which are semi-affordable in comparison to a lot of these new autograph cards that are coming out, like the First Bowman prospects. So you have both sides of the equation. Are you going to take a gamble on new players, or are you going to go with the safe bet like Willie Mays, one of your top 5 players of all time? I'd rather put the money into someone like Mays.
Okay, I need to come to your house. I think we need to do a DNA test because you might actually be my son. Like, we need to talk to your dad, and I need to meet your mom. Maybe I've met her. No, I'm just kidding. Seriously, I think the same way. And I'm always going to trade a known for an unknown, right? Why would you invest? And I get it's fun, and there's a gambling aspect to it, and I want to be right. There's this I want to be right part of it. I've had way too much experience with by the way, prospecting is not new.
No,
it's been around since the mid 80s, really.
Mattingly was the first guy that people really prospected, or that's what I've read up on.
Yeah, Mattingly. Another guy the same year, Alvin Davis for the Mariners, was a huge prospect / rookie star. You had Darryl Strawberry back then, Dwight Gooden, all these. Fernando Valenzuela was before that, even, like the frenzy of Fernando Mania. So that all was the genesis of that. And probably it was even happening earlier. It just wasn't as widespread as it became in the 80s due to the popularity of the hobby growing in the mid to late 80s, hence the junk wax era, which it spawned. And so I just see that's not a new thing, and yet it's always been a recipe for disaster long term. You're going to be right a very, very low percentage of the time, and it seems like a lot of good money chasing after bad when you could just buy the known versus the unknown. You agree with that?
100%. I mean, I don't know what the prices were in the 80s, but I'm sure if you bought a vintage player, again, you could use a Mays or a Mantle or whoever else back then in the 50s, put money in them instead of the prospects in the 80s. I wonder what's gone up more since then as well.
Yeah, and how many cards you literally that have would be worthless, right? Of those, players. But that's what I love about that. That really converted me from being a player collector in the 80s, 90s, even early 2000s to becoming a very Hall of Fame centric collector. I saw the error of my ways over decades of just, I collected Darryl Strawberry, and then I collected Juan Gonzalez and Devon Rodriguez. I mean, player after player, Josh Hamilton, that are great. Like I think Juan Gonzalez should be a Hall of Famer. Most disagree with me, but that's okay. Darryl Strawberry was great, but not at the time for a time, right?
Yeah,
those cards are relatively unvaluable. Now, the key there is that it shouldn't be all about the value. Like, let's be clear. If you're a collector, it shouldn't matter. Like, I know plenty of people that still collect Darryl Strawberry, but it does matter. Like, you don't want something to be worthless. Josh Hamilton, I spent tens and tens of thousands of dollars. I don't even know. I don't even want to know how much money I spent on Josh Hamilton stuff being a player collector. And I love doing it. I enjoyed it. There's a cost of the enjoyment of the hobby for sure, but those cards are all pretty much paperweights in my collection now. I have to stack a bunch of them up to be a paperweight, but I just think that's a really smart attitude that you have towards it. And so
having trouble managing your valuable collection and finding price transparency in the sports card market? Me too. That's why I use CardHedge. CardHedge is a brilliant price analysis and collection management tool. Track all your grades across PSA, CSG, HGA, SGC, BGC, and as well as your raw cards. CardHedge pulls their research from sites like eBay, StarStock, MySlabs, and Golden Auctions. You want an accurate picture of the sports card market? Yeah, me too. With over tens of thousands of cards in their system, CardHedge is the definitive sports card price guide. Quickly search by card, player, or set. Sort by price or percentage change. It has a lot of awesome advanced features. So what are you waiting for? Join today for only $14.99.
When you go to shows, you're going to all these different shows. Are you looking right now for vintage stuff primarily? Or are you still doing the occasional modern card? How's that looking?
I'd say probably 80% vintage, 20% modern. You can't completely ignore the modern cards. And typically I like using modern cards to trade to a dealer for vintage cards. Now, a lot of people will use, some people will use a vintage card as collateral on big trades with some of these dealers, and they'll have 90% modern and 10% vintage. They know nothing about vintage cards. They don't care about vintage cards. They think they're old, whatever. And I don't really like these cards, but they will trade a vintage card for a modern card all day long because they know they can liquidate that modern card really fast. Vintage cards, their buyers aren't interested in it. So I'll take some of the modern cards, which I know were undervalued or something I think was going to go up, and then use those as collateral in a trade with cash for a vintage card and just trade my way up through that. That's how I ended up getting a Jim Brown rookie card, and also how I ended up getting a Walter Johnson Portrait 2 at the Dallas Card Show for $700 worth of trade material.
That's awesome. When you think of liquidity, you mentioned that word, and I think that's something important to think about if you're a flip, or if you're a guy that's using parts of your collection to add other parts of your collection like you are. How do you think the differences are between, or what do you think the differences are between the liquidity of modern versus vintage? How would you describe it to someone?
Yeah, so modern stuff is a lot more liquid because what you have is a lot of people that just go to a card show and flip for a living. So they'll see modern players like, let's say, a LeBron or a Josh Allen or a Tom Brady, and their goal is to buy those cards because they have people already after the show that will buy them off of them for X percentage. So they'll just go to the shows, buy up all those people, all those stars from today, and that stuff moves super quick. On top of that, a lot of newer collectors don't really know the vintage side of things. They just know the players that are on the TV. They see a Tom Brady doing well in a football game, go, I want to buy a Tom Brady card. So they'll go to a card show or go on eBay, MySlabs, or any type of marketplace and go purchase those cards. However, on the vintage side of things, they're not as liquid. Those type of collectors have been in the game for a lot longer, respect those cards. And a lot of those cards as well are put into collections. They aren't brought out to trade at shows. They're put away, stored away, and they're like, okay, this is going to go all the way to my grave. I do not want to sell this card. So you have two completely different markets on that side of things.
Yeah, I totally see it too. It is funny to go to a show like the Dallas show or wherever, the National, and you have a modern case full of modern stuff, and then the random Mickey Mantle or a Hank Aaron rookie or something weird because they got it for some trade or it was just part thrown in or whatever to make a deal happen. But they're a modern person, and you can know they're a little bit out of their league when you start talking vintage. And unfortunately, most of the times when I see that, it's not necessarily a card I need or want, but I have that, man, I'd love to find a card that I would love to target with somebody in that scenario where it's not about taking advantage of someone. It's about using your leverage and knowledge of vintage versus someone who doesn't maybe know as much about it. And I see these two dichotomies, two different worlds. You've got the Pelican case crew who cards are just going, like you said, from Pelican case to Pelican case, guys trading these modern cards because they're so liquid, and that's what they know and they understand. When the modern card gets bought or the vintage card gets bought from that case at a show, it's coming into the beast and going into the black hole, never to be seeing the light of day again. And that happens. Multiply that, take me multiplied by hundreds and thousands of collectors that out there that are older like me, and they're buying it for the forever collection, not the for 5 minutes from now collection. If the right deal comes along, right? You see the same thing?
100%. Hold on one second. Let me move my camera. If I don't open the screen, it overheats and it'll turn off.
Okay.
So open that up for a second. No, but you see that all the time. And that's why at shows as well, sometimes a lot of the vintage dealers have their cards priced at or above comps, whereas a lot of the modern dealers will have it slightly below comps, because a vintage dealer, if they don't sell a Joe DiMaggio, if they don't sell a Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, they don't care. They know someone else will eventually come in and buy that card, and they're willing to spend a little bit more if they really, really want that card. Versus a modern dealer, they have to move that stuff because the next player could come out tomorrow, and everyone's going to chase that card. And that player that was in that showcase, no one cares about anymore.
Yeah. It's crazy to see the difference. Not surprising. When I was younger, I wanted the guys that I could see playing, and I get it. I understand it. I've just grown to appreciate the older stuff. The older I get, I look backwards more than forwards, I guess. And there's some reminiscence of that, some nostalgia factor there and all of that stuff. But again, I never saw Mickey Mantle play. I never saw Clemente play or Mays. So why do I love him so much? I just do. I love reading stories and the history of the game and all these things. But do you think right now the vintage market, would you call it fairly valued, undervalued, or overvalued relative to modern?
Relative to modern, I think it's slightly undervalued. I think it still has a lot more room, because if you look at the explosion of modern cards the past few years, they went up way more than vintage cards. Not saying vintage cards went up, but just like, even for example, right now with 20,000 Zion Prisms, you can still find his rookie card for like $300 or something like that. There's a ton of baseball Hall of Famers, which you can still find well under $100 in a mid-grade between 4 and 6. Are you saying a Zion, which there's 20,000 of those, should be the 3x some of these baseball Hall of Famers? I don't 100% agree with that right now.
I don't 100% agree with that ever. Not just even now. I never understand that.
Well, he's still way early in his career. If he ends up being like a Michael Jordan, maybe something changes. But man, 20,000 tens alone, that's literally junk wax era. And look how cheap the Shaqs are. Yeah,
and it's and Shaq is greater than Zion, like
absolutely,
way more. Something you target too that I see in your videos that you do, which by the way, if you don't follow Ryan on YouTube, it's Breakout Cards. Most people watching this probably watch you. I think you're a great watch. You go after mid-grade cards in the vintage world. Why is that? I love it, by the way, but why do you target those?
That's what I can afford right now. I can't drop, 4 figures on every single card, but if I can buy a mid-grade card for $300 or $500 and one day upgrade to a higher grade one, I'm perfectly content with that. Plus, it allows me to collect multiple players rather than just focusing on one specific card at a time. Because if I went out there and bought a high-grade card, which you don't always see at card shows as well, sometimes with those higher grade cards, you're going to have to go to an auction house. The dealers aren't going to have 8s and 9s of vintage cards, but you're able to find them at the shows and you can make them work.
Yeah. First of all, there's way more of them, right? That's probably and if people, and I think speaking of liquidity, there's always going to be a market for that card because it is affordable. Does that make sense? Like it's never going to be priced out if it's $100, $200, $250 card, a solid mid-grade of a all-time great. That market is way more liquid than I think the Pelican Case crew have come to realize. And I hope they never figure it out, because then that means they'll be buying all of these cards too. And they need to leave some for the old guys like myself. But there is a lot of liquidity there, believe it or not. And you'll never have a problem selling it. Will you get double your money? Probably not. That's, in the modern world, that's, well, maybe I can double my money or whatever. That doesn't happen in vintage a whole lot, barring death or like you saw with all the guys getting elected to the Hall of Fame yesterday.
There's all their stuff spiked a lot.
Yeah, Gil Hodges.
Here, let me just go on my phone instead. That happens every once.
Okay. So Ryan has stepped away. So we will just wait for Ryan to come back. I really do love his take on all of this stuff. Like it's such a different perspective than we hear a lot from younger people. And there's a lot of wisdom in it, right? There's a lot of he's learned, he's seen, he did the modern thing. And man, that's a dead end road's probably mean or just untrue. It's not that you can't have a lot of fun with modern stuff. It's just when you get into the bigger numbers, the vintage is just simpler. And I love that he's going after mid grades. I just or kind of, yeah, that mid grade area. And he's sticking with Mays and Aaron and the goats of that era, of the golden age era, Mantle. And I think that's really smart too. So hopefully Ryan will be back soon. He had some technical difficulties, but we're just going to wait. And he left now. Here he comes back.
There we go.
Hey, welcome back to the show.
Sorry about that. My camera sometimes overheats.
It's all right. I was, while you were gone, just totally ragging on you. And
oh man,
no, totally not. Very complimentary, actually. So let's go back to the mid-grade thing.
Yeah.
I think that's wise. I do think it's a liquid market. You can, and I loved what you said about I can get more players. Everybody, if they could, would want to own 8s and 9s of everything, right? I mean, sure. If money was no object, I would choose that. Well, money is an object for all of us, even Nat Turner, money. Nah, maybe not for Nat Turner, but the rest of us, right, have budgets and thresholds that we try not to deal with. But I think that's just a really wise way to do it. And you're going after Mays, Aaron. Are you sticking with just kind of the upper tier Hall of Famers, or are you delving into other stuff too?
I prefer upper tier, but I still collect even like the mid tier, lower tier Hall of Famers, at least on the baseball side of things. It's just fun going over all the different years and learning about players.
So what does your PC consist of? Do you have a PC of these aren't going anywhere, or is everything for sale at the right price in your mind?
No, I have a pretty large PC. I mean, I have probably thousands of cards locked away, which I don't want to trade or get rid of for a while until I have funds to upgrade them to higher grades. But like things like this, these weren't locked away yet, but I picked these up at recent shows. I got a 1954 Al Kaline. As nice. A little off center, but still it presents extremely well color wise.
Color's gorgeous.
And 54s are notoriously known to be off centered. What I like Al Kaline is you still have Hank Aaron in that set, and you have Ernie Banks, and their cards are super expensive in a 6. But I picked up this Kaline for $800. And personally, I think Kaline is just as good as Ernie Banks. He's nowhere near as good as Hank Aaron, but still a great player and probably one of your top 5 Tigers of all time, probably top 3. A beautiful card right there. And then it's a beater, but he doesn't really have many cards. Most of his cards are strip cards, but Rogers Hornsby, So I picked this up for $50, and it's a 23, I believe. Yeah, a 1923. Still a really cool card. And you don't see these often at shows, but I picked up two 1951 Burke Rosses. So a little bit my other PCs, but I picked up a Sugar Ray Robinson and then also a Ben Hogan. Ben Hogan, one of your top 5 golfers of all time, and Sugar Ray Robinson, probably one of your top 5 boxers of all time. When I see this type of stuff, I think it's so cool. And they're cheap. I mean, I picked up both of these for $90 and great cards.
That is awesome. So let's take Rogers Hornsby and Al Kaline. You just showed 2 great cards of theirs. When you get a card like that, what do you go do to learn? Do you go learn about the player? Do you go read stories? What do you do?
I mean, on the baseball side of things, I already knew who both of these guys were. Back when I was collecting the early 2000s, I bought multiple Roger Hornsby jersey cards because I have a big game used relic collection. So I don't really have many of his playing day cards. I think I ended up trading away a 1933 Gaudy, which I originally had, but I didn't have one of his early strip cards. And I think his first strip card's in 1920 or 1919. I can't remember the exact year. I think it's 20, but this is a 23, so it's one of his earlier cards. And then Al Kaline, I knew 54 had a bunch of iconic rookie cards, and I've wanted this card probably for quite a few years, but just haven't had the option to really make that happen. And I saw it at a show, and I was like, all right, let's pull the trigger on it.
Yeah. You could really argue that Hornsby is the greatest second baseman of all time.
A lot of people say that.
If you look at his, I mean, he hit 424 one year, I think. And
he averaged 400 for, I think, 3 years in a row.
Yeah.
Which I know everyone talks about how Ted Williams batted 400 twice. I mean, he averaged it for 3 years in a row. Again, different eras of baseball, but still, like, if you look up his total stats in general, I think he had also 40 home runs that year that he batted 400.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane.
Yeah, and he, is it Hornsby? Yeah, Hornsby's the all-time leader in doubles, or is that Tris Speaker? I can't remember. Maybe it's Tris Speaker.
I can't remember.
But that's the cool thing is, like, I'm watching baseball, the Ken Burns documentary. Have you ever seen it?
I have not. A lot of people told me to watch it, but I just haven't had the chance to.
Okay, make me a promise.
Okay.
You will over the next 3 to 6 months, before baseball starts, maybe by midseason, before the National. How about we make that
all
you
right.
go watch all 10 innings of Ken Burns baseball?
I'll do it.
First of all, you'll know why. Once you watch that, you'll know why this guy, Buck O'Neil, was elected to the Hall of Fame yesterday. Negro Leaguer, ambassador for the game. When you hear him tell stories on this show, all I do, so I'm watching. I was right before we did this. We started hitting record on this. I've been watching Shadow Ball as one of the episodes. It's the 30s. And each inning is a decade, basically. Right? Okay. And so I'm hearing him talk about Hank Greenberg and
star.
Right. And so all I do is then I pull up Baseball Reference and I'm like, oh my gosh. And they're talking about Bob Feller. And I go look at his stats. And then I look at, oh my gosh, look at how many years they lost from the war and how much better they were already amazing. And I start doing all of these, watching, listening at stories, looking at their stats, and that just starts building that knowledge base of who did what and why they're important to the game. And you hear stories from Buck O'Neil about Josh Gibson facing Satchel Paige in the 1942 Negro League World Series. And
that's cool.
It is so good, Ryan. It should be mandatory viewing for all baseball fans at some point in their life. I mean, it's a lot. It's, each inning is 2 hours. Oh. So you're talking about 20 hours of binging. But it is so worth it. Seriously, you will thank me later, I swear. And then I know you've heard this from other people, but I'm the one kind of putting it to you about it.
I'll watch it before the National.
They're showing each inning on every Wednesday night on MLB Network. They have 2 of them. I just record them. So I'll watch them. It takes me several days probably because I watch 30-minute chunks or whatever, and to watch each inning. and then I just watch the next one. And it takes me a month or so to probably watch them all. But every time I've watched it every year for 15 years, but I learned something new every time, or something else sticks. If that makes, like, I've heard it all before, I've seen the thing many times, but and it finally sticks. Great. I'm sorry, I'll shut up about that, but I'm telling you, it is so good.
I gotta watch it.
And somebody like you that does appreciate it and have a passion for it and see the value in it at your age, this would take you to a whole nother level. It would take you to a whole nother level. So I'm excited to hear what you think once you start watching. Let me know. I want to hear. So what are some of when you think about vintage, and mainly this, my show focuses on post-war. So, 48 or 49 Bowman through 1980. I consider 1980 the last year of vintage. And the golden age is what I really call it, because vintage could be a 2000 card. It's 21 years old. In theory,
and they're like, "Oh, this vintage Tom Brady rookie card." I'm like, that's not vintage.
Well, it depends on what your definition is of vintage. So I think you just need to break sports cards down into eras, right? You've got the pre-war era, you've got the golden age era, probably through the 70s, and then you've got the overproduced era. I can't remember. I had a name for it one time that was really snazzy, but I can't remember it anymore. But what are some of your favorite sets from that golden age?
The golden age? Well, I'll start off with the iconic 48/49 Leaf. One of the first sets right after there, between all the baseball, boxing, and football cards that were produced among the three different sports. I think they really, really pop. And we've seen in recent years how much the Jackie Robinson's gone for. But what was really cool about that set is the Satchel Paige being such a super short print. I think there's probably less than 50 or 100 of those out there. One, like a super grail card, I don't know if I'm ever going to afford it one day, especially with how much they are now. Factor in probably 5 plus 10 years, whatever, if I'd even try to get that type of card, how much that'd be going for at that point. But man, just when I think of baseball cards, it's one of those sets, at least post-war, that comes to my mind right away. Some of those early Bowman releases are really nice too. 1950 minis are really, really, really cool set between the Jackie Robinson in there and also the Ted Williams. Moving forward, 1953, the paintings really, really awesome as well. I know 52 tops, but I mean, everyone talks about 52 tops, so kind of skip that one a little bit. But the 53, the portraits are really cool. I like 54s because you have two pictures on the front. You have the pose and the picture, obviously, from Al Kaline right there, and the three borders as well, and the colors pop extremely well on them. Then you have your 55 and 56s, your horizontals that look nice. 59, the circulars, and 60 as well. Not too bad with the horizontal design. Some of the 60s I'm not the biggest fan of. I'd probably say 65 with kind of like the pennant banners are pretty cool on that. But 68 I think is kind of ugly. 62 I think is kind of ugly as well. 63 is actually kind of nice. But those chip extremely well, kind of like the 71 tops, which I like the 71 tops black. They just really, really stand out. But man, finding those in high grade is tough, and they're really, really expensive because of that. After 71, 72 are okay, but I'd probably put 75 as my second favorite release in the 70s.
Okay. I like those choices. And I mean, obviously there's a lot to love in the vintage era, right? It's hard to narrow it down and say, what's my favorite set? You mentioned the Leaf set, which I think is one of the greatest sets of all time. And you mentioned the scarcity, and it's real scarcity versus manufactured scarcity. That, vintage does have some real scarcity to it. There's the pops on any mantle card is way lower than, one Zion card. Like you could take, or whatever. It's ridiculous. The differences, and I'm talking about total pop, like across all grades, kind of how many have been graded total, but it's genuine scarcity. Believe it or not, the scarcest rookie in that set, the most expensive card in that set is maybe not the most expensive, but one of the hardest cards to get is the Hal Newhouser rookie. He was a pitcher for the Tigers.
Yep. And Hall of Famer is one, right?
Yep. 2-time MVP, back-to-back years, as a matter of fact. But only pitcher to win back-to-back MVPs. But
Crazy.
Go try to find that card. I mean,
Adobe's the other super short print, like Hall of Fame rookie card, because Leaf, if I remember correctly, they didn't put all the numbers in that set. There was missing some cards, and then some of them they made it extremely difficult so people would continue to buy packs. So you had Adobe, Page, and Newhouser. I think because Musial is common in that set, and then Jackie is also technically common in that set. There's a few other names in there as well, but like the big name side of things.
Well, that set and the 48 Bowman were the first sets post-war, really, that were nationally distributed, in bigger sets. Until then, it just wasn't a thing on the radar. There was no company doing it because we were recovering, kind of getting out of the war effort. Paper, you could actually print stuff again, and put gum in cards and all that kind of stuff. So
it's a shame because we lost Gaudi with all their nice 1930s releases. And I know kind of 41 for Gaudi was kind of a slack design compared to the early 33, 34, and the 38 heads up, or the 35 4-in-1s. But still, man, just imagine what Gaudi could have done.
Well, I don't know. Are you a fan of the play ball? I love the play ball cards.
Yeah. Well, they turned into Bowman.
Right. But you got 40, 41 play ball. 39 play ball has some great cards in it.
The Ted Williams rookie.
Williams, you got a great DiMaggio in the 39 as well. Those are great stuff, kind of pre-war. That's the end of the pre-war era, essentially. And then also, underrated sets, I think, are 49 Bowman. If you get the right cards with the colors, can be just gorgeous. The Jackie's beautiful, right? I mean, what's that?
Campanella, his rookie card.
Campy. I have that card in a 5.
Yeah.
And then, Page has a rookie, kind of a rookie in that set too. It's weird though. The Leaf was over 2 years. It's kind of that weird.
I consider like the rookies in both 48 and 49 Bowman, just depending on where they lie with Leaf as well. Just because that 2-year run. And it's funny, some of the grading companies will say it's 48, others say it's 49. Some of them haven't corrected it. Like, no one really knows.
Right. So are you a pro grading guy, like for vintage, or do you buy raw stuff too? What do you do there? Sure.
I mean, I look at it both ways. If I see a nice graded card, I'm not going to pass on it. But at the same time, you find a lot better deals on raw cards, assuming you check their authenticity and you check to make sure that they aren't trimmed or altered in any other way. But either way, like, I have most of my collection raw right now just because of how expensive it is to grade cards. And if it was back cheaper, it was like $10, $20 to grade, I'd probably send a lot more in. But at $30 plus, all the way to $100, it's just not feasible to put those type of cards in there.
How do you verify? You mentioned authenticity. That was the number one reason I started gravitating towards graded cards, because I started buying these more expensive cards and I was worried about getting either not necessarily even a fake card, but an altered card of some kind. And look, no grading company is perfect. They're people too. They make mistakes, and I don't, hold any grading company to a standard that I can't even uphold, which is perfection. So, but they're still going to be better than me just looking at it myself, right? It's another set of eyes. Do you worry about authenticity when you're getting these vintage graded cards, and how do you determine real, not real, trimmed, not trimmed, etc.?
You can pick up an eye pretty fast going through vintage cards, seeing what's real or fake. Most of the fakes out there for on the vintage side of things are photocopies, and they use completely different stock. So literally, you can pick up a real version, a fake version. They're often a lot thinner. And I've been studying fake cards at least the last 12 months, kind of writing down a bunch of different notes on it. Always bring a loop with you as well. You can look at the ink patterns on cards, and vintage cards, pre-war cards, all the way to today, like completely different ink patterns. You can tell really, really fast looking through that. You also can use a flashlight and use the light test to see if light emulates through the card. It's different for every single year. You just have to continually test different cards. What I recommend for people is have a common with you, and then also the expensive card, because they're going to be on the same exact sheet, assuming also that they have the same colored backs, because with the vintage cards, sometimes you have the white backs versus the gray backs, a little bit different pieces of cardboard. So just make sure the backs line up as well. Also, you can have a black light on vintage cards. A black light will not have the card glow. On newer cards, however, it glows really, really bright. If you see a vintage card and it glows with that black light, you know it's a fake.
God, that is great advice, Ryan. That is fantastic stuff, man. I hope people out there are as impressed with you when they hear you talking about all this stuff, because you know a ton for things. If you were thinking, okay, over the next year, let's say, or until the National, which by then you'll have watched baseball by Ken Burns maybe multiple times, but what cards are you kind of targeting right now? What are you looking at right now? What do you think is good stuff to be going after?
Yeah, so 2 cards I really want to get next year. I don't know if I'm going to get before the National, if I'm going to get it towards the end of the year. We'll see. I really want to get a 39 play ball Ted Williams. It's like one of the top cards. And I also want to get a T206 red Cobb. I just think those cards are some of my favorite in the hobby, and I need to work out a way to get one of those. I don't want a 1 per se on the Ty Cobb. I'd want at least like a 1.5 or 2, because a lot of the ones look really, really bad from the T206 sets, especially as they're wrinkled. So I'd prefer to have one with some damage, obviously, but I can't afford like a 4 or 5. So start with like a 1.5 or 2, and then the Ted Williams as well, because I personally think if he didn't miss those 5 seasons to WAR, he would have been the best baseball player of all time.
Do you, by the way, hard to argue that point about Williams, by the way. He missed some very key years, right?
He did. And imagine if he didn't go to WAR, the consistency of those extra years, because missing years of not playing baseball with major league competition, you know, it's going to take time to get back to where you were.
I mean, you're totally spot on. And he did it twice.
Yeah. That's the amazing.
World War II and Korea, right? So, man, you've been to the National. Did you go last year? I can't remember.
I did. I've been to the National twice now.
I guess technically it's this year. It's still 2021. So you went to the National in Chicago, and then you went in Chicago in 18, I guess.
18, I can't remember the year, but yeah.
No, it was 19. I'm sorry. You're right. And what's your impression of the National? What was your impression of your first National in 2019?
So yeah, my first National, I went there with my dad, and we've only gone to local card shows. We didn't go to any of the other big shows. And the card shows I went to were either mall shows or in a flea market. So a lot of vintage dealers, a lot of like lower end vintage cards. There's some higher end cards too, but like we always went through dime boxes, dollar boxes, and bought some vintage cards raw. But the National, man, was just a complete another experience. That was pretty much the first time I saw some of these high value T206 cards and pre-war stuff that I saw online, but never really saw in person at these shows. And I was just really, really blown away on that side of things. And then even then, like, I'm from Tampa, so I'm a big race fan. Remember at the first National I went to, someone had the Wander Franco Superfractor Auto. So it's like, I know I'm not huge into modern cards, but that's pretty cool seeing like our number 1 prospect there, super hype card. And I think at that time someone was asking $20,000, which looks like a bargain now if you compare what it would go towards an auction for that first Bowman Chrome Auto. But man, it was so cool seeing all those cards that I'd see in Beckett or see online, just to actually get to see them in person. And that's one thing I'd recommend to people. If you only have one day at the National, you know, obviously go shopping first, but if you have a few hours at the end, just walk around and take it in as a museum. It really is a card museum because you see everything there, anything and everything.
Totally agree with you. I went to my first National 8 years before you were born. Like,
it's 1990.
It's true. Oh, but when you go to the National, like you said, I would never tell someone not to go, period. But if you don't go one day, try to go 2 or 3 days, because as you're well aware and can probably affirm, there's so much. There's no way to see it all in one day.
It's sensory overload. There's way too much to do at the National. And then, like, if you're in that content space, you have to meet all your friends as well. And man, it really it's a week for a reason.
Yeah, I say showtime, floor time is valuable time. And I try to be careful about how much time I spend socializing. Although I always need a break every once in a while, and can see a friend and say hi and walk around with them or whatever, but I'm there to hunt. You know, I'm on the hunt, and that there's only so many hours the show is open during the week. Is your favorite time, would you say, since you've been now to a couple, early in the week or late in the weekend?
I've only gone during the weekends. So
Okay.
the one time I went was on Saturday in 19, and then this year I went Friday and Saturday. I went Friday and Saturday.
Well, let me tell you, voice of experience talking now. Although there's people love the weekends because dealers are trying to get rid of stuff, and there's a lot of logic to that, and that's true. I go on my favorite day is Wednesday, and it's because everything is there. It hasn't been picked through and gotten scooped up by somebody else. I'm not going to necessarily although I never pay sticker for anything ever. I'll walk away. It's fine. You can still negotiate. There's just not as much give typically early in the week because they're like somebody else will come along Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday and buy this card for more than you're willing. What I found though is dealers are kind of make hay while the sun shines. For a lot of cards, it's, well, I got somebody that wants to give me real money for cardboard, so I'll take it, you know, but Wednesday gives you the full spectrum of everything available. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I definitely want to go there. This year I had work, so I couldn't really take off till Friday. I didn't have enough PTO at that time. But next year I'm going to for sure get there probably Wednesday morning and be able to experience those days, and probably leave after Saturday when I go to trade night.
Now you're talking. That's a good plan. I love it. I love that. Something you mentioned in probably in passing in your train of thought, but I thought it was an interesting idea. I think younger people, maybe you can dispel this rumor if you agree, think that vintage has to equal big money, and they may just not have big budgets yet for cards. I think you would argue you can find vintage cards at great deals if you're willing to either go mid grades or non-grade raw. True? Not true? What do you think?
I'm going to disagree with that. And the reason why I think a lot of young people aren't into vintage is the research involved with it. And it goes back, we're talking about, you can watch TV and you can see Tom Brady, or you can see Juan Soto or any other star of today playing the sport. But for vintage, you're going to have to research these players and figure out, I mean, there's obvious names out there, Mantle, Mays, Clemente, but beyond that, it takes research into actually going into Baseball Reference or Fangraphs and looking and learning about these players and going to their Wikipedia page or watching YouTube clips to really understand who these people are. It's not only that aspect of things. Now you have to go back and learn all these different sets rather than where everyone's buying modern stuff and you know all these different releases coming out because people are hyping them up. You don't have to really educate yourself as much. It takes a lot of dedication to go backwards and learn everything. Whereas if you're in the present amount of time, you're just going to absorb everything because of what's going on.
I like it. So you don't think it's not a money issue necessarily. It's a connection, familiarity issue. Agreed?
Correct.
Okay. I like that. I can understand that. Wow. So what would you encourage a younger collector, anybody say under 25, that they're thinking about going into vintage or they want to dabble? What would you tell them to do? What resources would you tell them to look at?
Yeah, first I just start looking at the different players and different sets that are available out there. Stick with one sport as well. Don't go football, baseball, basketball. Focus on one thing at a time and learn it. Learn your different tops runs all the way from your 48, 49, the different, the magic cards. Then you have your red and blue backs of the playing cards. You have your felt backs, which is football only, but 50, probably if you're doing baseball, 51 all the way through the 80s. Learn the different sets, because as you learn the different sets, you'll learn what the Hall of Fame rookie cards are and the top players, and you'll start recognizing names a lot more often. If you notice a top rookie card, let's say, for example, back 1954, Ernie Banks, Hank Aaron, and Al Kaline, those are some of the top cards in there. Well, if their rookie cards are worth a lot of money, then so are their second-year cards or third-year cards. And you start learning, okay, if I see a 55 Kaline or a 55 Banks or Aaron, that is still going to be a valuable card. It's a card that's good from that set, not only just the rookie cards. And you really, really learn things fast that way.
I love it. Great advice. Well, man, tell everybody where they can find you out in the, social media netherworld, and they can start following you. Throw that stuff out there for people.
Yeah, so my main YouTube channel, which you see me go to all the different shows and interview a collector every single week and talk about fake cards, is Breakout Cards on YouTube, also Twitter and Instagram. And then if you want to check out my second channel, which I talk about data with cards, I'm a full-time data analyst, so I try to apply that also with sports cards. That is Moneyball Cards on YouTube.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, it's been honestly a great pleasure. I knew this was going to be a great discussion that we would have. I've been really looking forward to this and glad we could finally connect and make this happen. I appreciate your perspective on vintage. I appreciate your respect for it and your desire to learn. I mean, I wish I saw more collectors with that. It's good to see.
This is fun as collecting.
It is. So, well, thanks, man, again for being here. Thanks, everybody out there for watching, listening, wherever it is that you're consuming this content. I always appreciate it. Let me know what you think down below, and tell me how impressed you are with this kid over here. And he's still a kid. He's an adult, but he's a kid. And I mean that in the most loving way, Ryan. We'll catch you guys soon. Keep collecting.
Yes!